Nearly 200,000 people tear their ACL every single year in the United States alone. Of that 200,000, barely half will return to the level of competition or sport that they were at previously. Of that half that do make it back to their competition, another half will either re-injure their ACL or injure the other leg within the next 2 years. So we have a 25% not failure rate, a 25% success rate in this industry of getting athletes back on the field and staying there. Frankly, I think we can do better than that. My name is Zach Woodward, and I specialize in helping athletes come back from ACL and other major knee injuries a stronger, healthier version of themselves. I come from an athlete background myself. I played collegiate soccer and had a career that was sidelined by injury, so I know what you're going through. Personally, that was one of the most challenging periods of my life, but that became the catalyst that led me to solve my own injury problems, transform my athletic ability much greater than it ever was before, and now be able to help people like you avoid some of that pain and frustration that I experienced. I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science and a master's degree in kinesiology. I've worked with athletes all over the world, from Premier League soccer players to MLS All-Stars, world champion Muay Thai fighters, Olympic big air skiers, Red Bull athletes, and weekend warriors and recreational athletes. I've coached national champions at the Division I level as a strength and conditioning coach, and now I specialize in return to sport protocols for athletes trying to come back from ACL and other major knee injuries. To date, I've helped over 150 athletes successfully return to their sport without a single athlete who has completed their entire training protocol, re-injuring or injuring their other knee. So I've got a pretty unique track record in this industry, as well as a pretty unique way of training athletes that's led to that track record. And that's what I want to share with you today. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling with their rehab, who are not seeing the results that they want, and I don't want you to be one of them. This presentation today is going to be a deep dive into exactly what I do differently from conventional rehab protocols, why I do things differently, how to do them correctly and apply them in your own rehab, and the exact protocols I actually use with my in-person remote clients so you can take this and use it in your own rehab today. So we are going to focus on 4 of the most important exercises that I use the most often that other practitioners and protocols often don't. I'm going to tell you exactly why I use these exercises so much, what I'm trying to get out of them, the exact form and technical cues I use with my athletes to perform them correctly, progressions and regressions you can use to scale each exercise up or down to match your current ability level, and the exact set and rep schemes I use for each of these at various levels of the rehab process. By the time we're done, you should be able to build a fully structured rehab protocol with exact sets, reps, and frequencies, and know how to perform each exercise perfectly, either for yourself or for someone you work with. Now, my biggest piece of advice before we dive in, do the little things well. Pay attention to the details, focus on performing each exercise to the very best of your ability, and keep in mind the goal of each exercise as you're going through it, why we're doing it, what we're trying to get out of it in the first place. The single biggest factor that I've seen be the most impactful in people's rehab and separate those who get decent results from those who get amazing results is attention to detail. Those who show up with a growth mindset looking to learn and get better each and every day. The fact that you're watching this tells me that you're probably one of those people, so hang on to that and let's go. So the first place we're going to start this little deep dive is with the sled, for the simple reason that it is probably the single most effective way to dramatically increase blood flow to the quad and the knee while putting minimal strain on the knee itself. One of the challenges with connective tissue injuries is that they don't have the same blood supply as muscle tissue, and that's part of the reason why injuries to these areas take so much longer to heal than muscular injuries. The sled is a very effective way to increase blood flow to the knee and the surrounding muscle to work with the body to speed up and facilitate its natural healing process. In just a couple of minutes, you can get one of the best quad burns of your life, all without flaring up or aggravating the knee itself, even in the early stages of rehab. We'll get into the exact details of how I've done this in the next section, but I've used variations of the sled with athletes as early as 4 weeks post-ACL surgery, still in their big cyborg knee brace, and be able to get them a fantastic workout, all 100% pain-free. The trick and why this works so well is that pushing or pulling a sled is a form of what's known as concentric-only training. Every exercise or basic movement pattern can be broken down into 3 phases: the eccentric or lowering phase, think the way down in a squat; the concentric or lifting phase, think the way up in a squat; and the isometric phase, which is the transition period between the two. The eccentric or lowering phase of an exercise puts the most strain on the muscular and connective tissue. This is great for building strength and hypertrophy, but also causes the most DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness, which leaves you feeling like you can't walk for a couple of days after a big leg workout. There are pros and cons to this, and loaded exercises through a full range of motion are absolutely going to be a staple in our rehab after an ACL injury. But what if there is a way to maximize blood flow to the joint while minimizing the fatigue and stress on the joint itself? This is where sleds come in. When dragging a sled, the eccentric portion of the movement is essentially weightless. This is the part of the movement where you reach your leg back to touch the ground. It is not until you touch the ground and push through the foot, the concentric portion of the movement, that you have to overcome any resistance. This allows you to dramatically increase blood flow to the joint and get a great pump in the muscle with very little stress on the joint or the connective tissue. This has a few key benefits. One is that it allows you to work really hard and push yourself even in the early stages of rehab without overdoing things. This is incredibly useful because the body needs a strong stimulus in order to heal, adapt, and get stronger. The challenge in rehab is that there are a lot of things that you can't do, especially in the beginning, because you don't want to make things worse. The sled is a highly effective tool that allows us to check both of those boxes, work hard, but do so safely. A secondary benefit of that is the mental win that comes from being able to work hard and push yourself again. One of the hardest parts of an ACL or other major knee injury is going from an athlete or active person to barely being able to walk or go up and down stairs, much less compete in the sport or participate in the hobbies that you love. The sled is one of the first tools that can give you the feeling of being able to use your body and challenge yourself again, and can help you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And lastly, not only does the sled allow you to push yourself hard, but it also allows you to push yourself often. Because the sled has a minimal eccentric component, it is not only gentle in the joint, it also creates very little muscle damage and soreness. This means that even when you push yourself to the point of exhaustion, where your legs are on fire and you're gasping for air, you can still come back the next day feeling completely fresh and do it all over again. This allows you to work harder and more often than what anybody else is doing, supercharge your recovery, and get back out on the field or the court or the slopes faster and stronger than anyone else. So that's the why. Now I'm going to show you exactly how I use the sled with everyone I work with, how to set it up, what proper technique looks like, what I want you to focus on, so you can train this yourself, just like how I train with the clients I work with in person and online. The backwards sled drag and all the variations we're going to get into have one very simple goal: to get your quads on fire. Everything we do, from the different setups, coaching cues, and rep schemes, are all designed to do this one thing. The more you can feel your legs burning, the more you can lean into that discomfort and push through it, the better you're going to feel and the faster you're going to heal. As far as technique goes, this one's actually very simple. The main things to focus on are staying up tall or even leaning slightly back with the shoulders to concentrate the load on the knee and the quads and not let the hips get involved and take over. After that, we just want to make sure that you're pushing nice and evenly through both feet and not letting the stronger, healthier leg take over from the smaller, injured one. Otherwise, you can vary the weight and speed until you find the combination where you feel your quads working the most. The main challenge most people have with the sled is actually the setup, actually finding the right equipment or space to be able to do it effectively and get that burn that we were talking about. So that's where we're going to start. The ideal setup is an actual sled that allows you to both push forward and pull backwards comfortably with 20 or more yards of space to be able to get a good rhythm going and not be stopping to turn it around every 10 seconds. Now, I recognize that many of you, maybe even most of you, don't have a setup like that. So what you need to do is come out to Denver to train with me in person. But assuming not everyone who watches this video is probably going to hop on a plane, I do have plenty of substitution and DIY options for you. My favorite substitute is actually not a sled at all, but a treadmill, which you'll be able to find in just about any gym that you go to. Bonus points if you can find one of those non-motorized treadmills that has the adjustable resistance, like the Matrix S Drive. This is a lot less common, but super duper awesome if you can find that one. This is what we were looking at in the previous clip. So for a normal treadmill, you're going to get on, leave the treadmill turned off, turn around so you're facing backwards, and start to get the belt spinning using the internal resistance of the treadmill to create the resistance that you need to overcome. This is probably my favorite variation because it allows you to get into a rhythm. You never have to stop to turn it around, so you can just put your head down and go for 3, 4, 5, even 10 minutes straight and get some really awesome work in. The drawback of this option is it doesn't work as well for some of the forward pushing variations we're going to talk about, and you can't change the resistance like you can on an actual sled by adding weight. You can make it harder by going faster, but that's about it. Still, I do really like this variation for people in the earlier stages of rehab because of the ability to go uninterrupted for extended periods of time. Pretty much as soon as you're able to start walking comfortably, you can start walking backwards, even if you're not going very fast. And the treadmill option lets you hold on with your hands so you're super stable and don't have to worry about falling over. The next variation I like to use for people is an alternating pushing and pulling variation rather than the backwards only. This works really well for people who have a sled but only a short turf space, because rather than having to stop to turn it around every 10 yards, you can smoothly transition from forwards to backwards at each end of the turf. The only difference in technique is that going forward, we will take longer strides and keep the heels off the floor the whole time, but otherwise you will get similar muscular burn in the quads as you do with the backwards variation. The main challenge here, setup-wise, can be finding suitable straps or handles for the backwards variation, as many gyms will have sleds that you can push forward, but you may have to be a bit creative to find a comfortable setup to pull backwards. My favorite setup are TRX straps, and if you're lucky, you can find those in the gym that you're in and clip them to the end of the sled. If not, gymnastics rings are a cheap option that work really well and are awesome for a bunch of other exercises, so well worth the $20 or $30 that they cost to get them from Amazon. You can also find some pretty cheap sled harnesses online, and in a pinch, some thick elastic bands can work, but they're not my favorite option. These options will allow you to still get into a pretty good rhythm by just going back and forth at whatever pace feels comfortable without taking breaks at either end of the turf. A couple other options are just to buy your own sled. These days, you can find some pretty affordable options on Amazon and other places online. And if you really want to be a cool kid, you can even make your own. When I used to train people at my local park, I made my own DIY sled out of a nylon laundry bag from Amazon, filled with two 50-pound sandbags from Home Depot, and my gymnastics rings that I already had for handles. It actually worked great on the grass and is part of some of my fondest memories of training, of getting my start any way that I could. So get creative, and you might surprise yourself with what you can come up with. Lastly, if you absolutely can't get access to a sled or don't have space to use one, this kind of banded quarter sissy squat is not a bad substitute if you're out in the jungle like Nico. Now, a good rule of thumb to follow for all of the variations that we're going to get into is the idea of starting slow and gradually ramping up the intensity over the course of the set. The sled is typically what I will use to start a session because that pump we keep talking about is not only a great stimulus by itself, it also serves as an amazing warm-up to help the knee respond better to the more challenging movements we're going to get into next. So now let's get into exactly how to program and progress this exercise, how many sets and reps, how many times per week, and how to make it more challenging as we get stronger. A general progression I like to keep in mind is distance, then speed, then weight. So when you're starting, I just care about getting the distance or time. You don't have to fly. I just want you to start to get some reps in and get some consistent movement. As you start to progress, then I want to challenge speed. Can you start to go faster and chase more of a burn? Then lastly, can we start to go heavier while still trying to move quickly and chase that burn? As I mentioned, I like to use the sled at the very start of a session. Not only does it provide an amazing stimulus for the knees to heal and get stronger, it also serves as an amazing warm-up that is going to make everything else we do after feel better. One of the reasons we're able to get our athletes into some of the more aggressive, challenging positions we're going to get into here in just a few minutes is because of how much we do to warm up the joint and the muscle first. We already mentioned how little blood supply some of these tissues have, the connective tissue in particular. That not only makes them slow to heal, it also makes them slow to get warm. The sled allows us to shortcut that process by bringing a ton of blood flow into the joint and the muscle tissue to get things warm and ready to go. So if you find yourself having a hard time with some of the more challenging movements, in addition to using the regressions that I'm going to show you to make those exercises more accessible, it can also be worth coming back to the sled and making sure we're getting as much out of it as we can first to make those movements friendlier and more comfortable when we do get into them. As far as actual protocols go, I have quite a few I like to progress people through over the course of their recovery. But as we mentioned earlier, the goal with all of them is the same: maximum pain-free muscle burn. The more you can feel your quads, the more you can push through that feeling like your legs are going to explode, the better every other aspect of your recovery is going to go. So the first and most simple protocol I like to follow is 5 to 10 minutes backwards, nonstop, every single day. This is where I start just about everyone I work with, particularly those people in those earlier stages. This is where I like that treadmill variation as well, because of that ability to go without stopping for the entire time period. This is just such a good entry point that anybody can do just to get the reps in. You don't have to fly or totally crush yourself with this one. We just want to get you moving, get the blood flowing, and start to get things switched on again. If we're feeling good, then that last minute or two is where you can start to push the pace and see if you can get things to burn a little bit more. Then for my overachievers out there, if you're looking for extra work, give me double sessions, 10 minutes AM, 10 minutes PM, daily. This comes back to one of the best things about the sled. You really can't overdo it. If you're looking for places to do extra work, this is it. The next protocol I progress people to is a little bit shorter, 3 to 5 minutes, but where we're really trying to ramp up the intensity as we go. Every 60 seconds, see if you can push the pace just a little bit more. Then that last 30 to 60 seconds, really give me everything that you've got. You can do this one all backwards on the sled or the treadmill, or you can start to do the alternating forward and backwards, depending on what equipment you have and which variation you prefer. If you want, you could also alternate and do one day all backwards, one day push-pull. I still like to use this protocol to start an athlete's workout, so frequency would be anywhere between 3 and 6 times per week, depending on how often they're training. If you want, you could definitely do this protocol daily as well, but usually at this point, we're starting to get a little more intense with our training, and I like to give my athletes at least 1 day off per week. Then lastly, a more advanced protocol I use for my athletes later stage in their recovery, 2 by 2 minutes. The first set we're using just to get moving and to get things warm. Rest for as long as you want to in between. Then that second set, we're getting after it from the start, really trying to push the pace. I prefer the alternating push-pull variation here, but you can definitely still use the backwards only option if that's your preferred setup. If you're using an actual sled here, I like to track the distance that you can cover in that second set at a given weight. Keep track of those metrics to give yourself targets to try and beat each week to be able to measure your progress. These are by no means the only protocols you can use for the sled, but they are some of my favorite. Feel free to explore and get creative, but just remember why we're doing these and what we're trying to accomplish in the first place. The next exercise on our list is the Poliquin or heel elevated step up. This is probably my single favorite exercise for strengthening the vastus medialis oblique or VMO. This is the teardrop shaped part of your quad muscle on the inside of your knee. This muscle plays one of the biggest roles in the strength and stability of your knee of any muscle in the body. Interestingly enough, it is also the muscle that tends to atrophy the most after ACL surgery. So rebuilding that muscle is a key part of my process to help people come back from ACL surgery and regain strength and confidence in their knee. And the Poliquin Step Up is one of my favorite exercises for doing so. Reason being is that when done correctly, this exercise is one of the best ways to target and recruit that VMO. Now, no muscle truly works in isolation, but you can bias different parts of a muscle more or less than another, depending on the technique you use. A common example of this is a traditional bicep curl, where your palms face upward, versus a hammer curl, where your palms face each other. While both exercises will work the biceps, you will feel a hammer curl work your brachioradialis, one of the big muscles in your forearm, much more than a standard bicep curl because of the position of your hand. We can take that same concept and by applying a few small changes in technique from a more traditional step-up exercise done in most rehab settings, we can have a big impact on where you feel this exercise working. Now, feel is a very important detail with this exercise in particular. And more than anything else, I want you and all of my athletes to try and feel that VMO working as much as possible when doing this exercise. A big reason for this is because of something you may have first noticed on the sled and is something I don't think gets explained to enough people going through the rehab process after an ACL injury. A very common experience people have when going through the sled for the first time is that they feel their non-injured leg working harder than their injured leg. Even though their injured leg has atrophied and is significantly weaker than their non-injured leg, it's their non-injured leg that they feel doing the majority of the work, no matter how hard they try and focus on the injured one. The reason for this is quite simple, but seems to be not explained to many people at the start of their rehab. The same way the muscle tissue will atrophy and shrink after a surgery from lack of use, the neurological connection between the brain and the muscle will weaken as well. So even though that leg is significantly weaker, you can't feel it working because the signal from the brain that controls that muscular contraction is not as strong. Restoring that signal and getting a strong contraction out of the quads, particularly that VMO, is a very important milestone in the early stages of rehab because without it, none of the strength work you're going to do later on is going to be as effective as it should be. Your body will shift and compensate and recruit different areas. So even though your numbers are going up, the knee itself doesn't feel as strong as it should because, well, it's not. Your body has just gotten good at working around its deficiency. This is very dangerous for a couple of reasons. In the best case scenario, your progress slows down and you plateau. Your body hasn't learned how to recruit the muscle properly, and you're only able to compensate so far before the body will not allow you to continue to progress and your progress will slow down. Worst case scenario, you open yourself up to greatly increased chances of re-injury. In a controlled environment, you can get away with those compensations, but out on the field or the court or the mountain where you have to react to whatever is in front of you in a split second without thinking, that's when those deficiencies can get exposed with not so nice consequences. This is why even more than technique, feel is so important with this exercise and something I really harp on with all of my athletes, especially in the beginning, so we can restore proper firing patterns to that area as soon as possible, help restore function, rebuild muscle tissue, and build strength as effectively as possible, and give ourselves the best chance we can of coming back strong, safe, and healthy. Now, one last piece before we get into the coaching cues. Some trainers actually avoid this heel elevated position with the step up because it can put a lot of strain and piss off that patella tendon, especially if you have a patella graft. Now, this is definitely true and something you want to look out for. However, for me, it is still a staple for two reasons. One, I don't want to avoid something because it is challenging. I want to find ways to get you into that position without it being painful. You may need to regress this exercise farther than you want to or think you should based off of where you're at in your recovery. I encourage you, however, to put your ego aside here and be willing to take the 1 or 2 steps back if they are needed to allow yourself to take 10 steps forward in the long run. Second, while this exercise can flare up that patella, it can also be one of the best exercises to fix it. You may notice through your recovery that certain days your knees just don't feel great for whatever reason, and you have a hard time getting a good workout and a good muscle activation. Then, other days, your knees feel great, and you can get a ton of quad activation with very little pain. The reason for this is that pain is very inhibitory neurologically. So the more pain you feel, the less quad activation you're going to feel, and vice versa. The more we can feel the quads working, the less we're going to feel pain. So the more you can focus on muscle activation here, over time you'll experience less and less of that tendon pain, and your knee will become much more tolerant of that position. Now, this philosophy also resonates much more with me and has helped me have success with numerous people who've been unsuccessful following a more traditional path. I don't want to avoid what is hard. I don't want to push through pain, but I want to face it, even if I have to scale it back right now to allow me to slowly build tolerance over time. If you do that, you may just surprise yourself with what you're capable of over time. So when it comes to restoring quad strength and VMO activation, the Poliquin Step Up is certainly not the only tool that we are going to use to accomplish this, but is definitely one of my favorites, and we're going to get into the exact details of how to do it properly right now. Now, the Poliquin Step Up can be a little finicky to get right, so we're going to get into some of the most effective cues to focus on and some of the common mistakes to watch out for. Just remember that even with all of these cues that we're going to get into, the most important thing I want you to focus on is how this exercise feels. Can you feel that VMO working? It may not be super strong from day one, but can you keep that as the main goal and move closer and closer to that each workout? For the setup, the first thing you need is something to elevate your heel. The ATG buddies are awesome if you've got them, but anything that you can use to elevate your heel can work. My favorite commercial gym setup is a medium thickness bumper plate, usually a 10 kilo or 25 pounds under your heel, while leaving the ball of the foot on the ground. A dumbbell with a hexagonal head can work as well so that it doesn't roll, but it's not my favorite. From here, turn your toe out just slightly. Imagine if there was a clock on the ground. You want no more than 12:30 if you're on your right foot or 11:30 if you're on your left foot. Less is more here. I'd actually do even slightly less than kind of what you see here in the picture. I also like to start people off with a stick or PVC pipe for balance in the opposite hand of the working leg. From here, the movement is just a simple, small, controlled step down until the heel of the other leg touches the floor. Pause for just a second, press back up, and repeat. That's it. Now, some details that will help you get more out of this exercise. First, control is the name of the game. You cannot go too slow on that way down, but you can definitely go too fast. The slower you go, the more chance the muscle has to engage rather than putting all that load through the patella tendon. When in doubt, slow down. Second is the hips. Hips need to go slightly forward here rather than stay behind you. This is going to keep all of the load in the knee and prevent you from cheating and using your glutes to help out. This is the most common mistake people make with this exercise and the biggest difference between the step-ups that you do in PT and what we're trying to do. I want to isolate and pick on that knee so that when you start to increase the reps and elevation, I know it's because your knee has gotten stronger and not because you've gotten better at working around and avoiding it. A cue that helps me here is actually to lean back just a little bit at the shoulders. This will help you get the hips forward more and keep the load concentrated on the knee. Now, it's important to note here that this technique will be much more challenging than your traditional step up, and you may find you need to start at a lower elevation than what you were doing before. If so, that is good. That means we're uncovering a weak spot for you, a weak spot we can now attack and get stronger. I want to expose all of your weak spots now in training so that you don't get exposed later on the field. This last cue can really help you go from feeling a lot of load or even discomfort in that patella tendon to getting much greater recruitment out of that VMO. You do this by shifting your weight towards your big toe on the way down and even letting the knee come slightly to the inside as you go. This may take a bit of feel to get exactly right, but when you do, can make a huge difference in terms of activation of that VMO. So a lot going on with this exercise, a lot of different cues to think about. Try just adding in one at a time until you feel comfortable and then adding in the next one, and keep your focus on the main goal, which is to feel that VMO working as much as possible. So, as we mentioned in the last section, the Poliquin Step Up can be a bit tricky to figure out and can definitely flare up that patella tendon if you're not careful. So you want to be sure that you're really focusing on technique with this one and not pushing the intensity too far too soon. A general progression that helps me do this is by prioritizing reps first, then elevation, then load if needed. So, how do we use it? In terms of the sequencing, this is one of the first exercises I will use immediately following our sled warm-up, as that pump that you just got from the sled can really help me get more muscle activation and less tendon pain when you go to perform this exercise. At its most entry level, I will start people on completely flat ground with just their heel elevated, the ball of their foot still on the floor. In addition, I also want people starting out to use plenty of support in this exercise to help with balance and take some of their weight off of the working leg. My favorite setup is with 2 PVC pipes on either side to really lean on and help stabilize yourself. You can also use a bar in front of you to lean on, but you can't offload as much of your weight when the support is in front of you rather than either side. So I encourage people to try and support themselves that way with sticks or PVC pipes next to them, even boxes if you need to, when you're starting out. This is also the one time I will allow people to sit back into their hips a little bit to intentionally offload their knee a little more if they need to when we're getting started. As we talked about, this is not ideal form for long term, but can be a good entry point for someone who's in the very early stages when they're just starting to load their knee. As they get stronger, then we'll start to get stricter with their posture and get them more vertical. But remember, when we're starting off, we just want to get them into this exercise pain-free, and that can be a helpful way to do so. With how small the movement is here, I really want you to focus on control and going as slow as possible. 3 sets of 15 reps is a great starting point with a full 3-second count on the way down, pause in the bottom, and a controlled contraction on the way up. A quick note here, you may notice your legs start shaking during this or any of our other step-up protocols we have. This is a great thing and something we want as much of as possible. Remember when we talked about that neurological connection between the brain and the muscle? A comparison I use here is like the brain flipping on and off a light switch. It is just trying to figure out and rewire those connections, and that's where you'll get a lot of that shaking. So if that starts to happen, I don't care what rep scheme you're working on, keep going. Stay in that zone and give me as many reps as you can here until you can't control it anymore. This is a really great sign for an adaptation. And while it will feel wild when you're in it, we want to get as much of that as we can. Will help restore that neurological connection and that strong firing pattern. Once you're getting comfortable here, the next progression is to start to increase the elevation and decrease the support. This is where we're now working with between 2 and 6 inches of elevation, plus the wedge or elevation for the heel. Now, I may still use one stick here just for support in the opposite hand of the leg that is working, but it's more for balance than support, and it's something that we want you to wean off of as you progress. A quick setup note here. Bumper plates work really well to make small incremental increases in elevation. If you're doing these correctly with good control and leverage in the knee, 1 to 2 inches will be a big jump. Take your time and prioritize mastery over increasing elevation as quickly as possible. Also, if you're using a bumper plate to elevate your heel, make sure you leave enough room for the ball of your foot to be on the plate below without your toes hanging off. Like this right here. The bumper plate may fall off on its own when you kind of are setting it up, but when you step on it with your heel, that'll hold it in place. So here, I really like to push the reps around 20 to 30. Just like the sled, I really like to ramp the intensity here over 3 to 4 sets. First set, start off with a comfortable elevation, go all the way to 30 with great control. Then bump the elevation no more than an inch or two and see if you can get 30 again with great control. If you can, you're free to bump up the elevation again. If you get to the point where you can't get 20 reps, drop the elevation. If you tap out somewhere in the middle, stay there. This is a great way to auto-regulate your training and push yourself as much as you can, as much as feels good on a given day. Some days will be better, some days will be worse, but this way we know you're working at your best for that given day. Bonus tip, for our unilateral exercises like our step-ups, we want to work both sides, but always start on the injured side and just match your performance with the good leg. So if you tap out at 15 reps with your injured leg, just do 15 on your good leg, even if you feel like you could do more. If you want to finish with an extra set on the injured leg, you're welcome to as well to get a little bit of extra work there. This way, you're starting to close the gap between sides without completely ignoring your good leg for 9 months, like most PTs do, and then base all of your strength numbers on that leg they just spent almost a year barely training. Now, an advanced technique I like to introduce around this time is something I call constant tension. This is where you get rid of the pause at the top of the exercise. You still control the way down, press back up, but then immediately begin the way down on the next rep without pausing at the top. This will make the exercise burn much more quickly because you take away that brief second of rest between reps. It doesn't seem like much, but trust me, you'll notice very quickly when you take it away. Now, the key with this technique is to keep the tempo on the way down. You're still going slow and controlled on the way down. You're just not pausing at the top. The biggest mistake people make with this is losing control over that eccentric. Don't let that be you. Now, I will spend a long time with my clients just progressing reps and height with this exercise. I think that this is where the majority of the gains are to be made. Some of my more advanced athletes, especially my taller athletes, I'll progress all the way up to an 8-inch step for 30 reps. I don't really go any higher than that, though, as it starts to change the mechanics of the exercise. So at that point, that is when I will finally start to drop the reps and start to add load. I do not go super low reps or high load because this is still a single leg exercise that requires a good deal of balance, but dropping down to sets of about 12 to 15 and adding weight either with dumbbells or a bar on back is something I will do eventually. Big thing, don't be in a hurry to get here though. Remember, VMO activation is still our main goal. Use your leverage, tempo, and elevation to get as much out of that exercise as you possibly can. Then if you really need to, you can start to add a little bit more weight at the end. Just be sure to keep the main thing the main thing. All right, so next we are getting into the ATG Split Squat, either the most loved or hated exercise on the internet, depending on who you listen to. Now, personally, I love it and use it a ton with every single one of my athletes coming back from ACL and other knee surgeries, and I'll tell you why. The way I see it, there are 3 main benefits to this exercise when it comes to the knee. 1 is restoring full range of motion, specifically flexion. 2nd is building strength through that full range of motion. And the most significant benefit, and the reason I keep coming back to it, is strengthening not just the muscles around the knee, but the internal structures within the knee itself, the tendons, ligaments, and the connective tissue. So going one at a time, range of motion should be a no-brainer. While you may not get into such deep range of motion in your sport, the way I look at rehab is if you had it before, I want it after. If you still have restrictions or limitations after you finished your rehab, then, in my opinion, you still have work to do. Only once we have erased any sign of being injured in the first place can we really say that we're done. Aside from the scar, you shouldn't be able to tell your knees apart. So while there are many ways to accomplish this, stretching, manual manipulation, and a variety of exercises that you can implement, the ATG Split Squat is still one of my favorites. By no means am I saying it should replace any of those other modalities, but at least for me, it is a staple and one that I see playing one of the biggest roles with our athletes, especially those who struggle with range of motion. The 2 main reasons I see for this are the scalability. We can use countless regressions, which we'll get into in the next section, to help people at any level get started with this exercise, and the fact that it is a loaded rather than a passive stretch. Even when we take off a lot of our weight with support, we're still taking our body weight into this end range and then using our muscles to lift ourselves back out. In my experience, gradual exposure to this kind of stimulus has been far more effective for helping athletes restore range of motion, keep that range of motion without having to stretch every single day, and actually be strong and comfortable in that end range rather than just being able to access it in a passive stretch on a PT table. Building off of that loading piece, we're also able to build strength in these deeper positions rather than just having passive access to them through stretching. This allows us to not only be very strong in every end range of motion we have access to, it also helps us build strength more evenly throughout the knee and the quad's entire range of motion rather than just the middle. See, many of the common exercises people use in rehab, front and back squats, split squats, lunges, leg press, and more, all overload and make you work hardest in this mid-range where the knees are bent around 90 degrees. The upper and bottom ranges of motion are not worked nearly as hard, so you don't develop as much strength there. You develop strength where you work the hardest, which in this case is the middle. This can lead to situations where one part of your body or range of motion is really strong, while another is relatively weak by comparison. This is not a good combination, something that can lead to poor performance or repeat injuries. The ATG split squat is hardest towards the bottom, so it strengthens a different part of that strength curve that can complement the strength work you are doing with some of these more traditional exercises. This also creates a perfect marriage of weight and mobility, as the weight of your body or external load helps pull you deeper into the stretch, improving your mobility. Then you have to lift that body weight or external load out of that end range, which improves your strength. So both qualities remain in harmony and improve together. You improve your strength and mobility at the same time and don't run the risk of outpacing one or the other. Lastly, the real magic of this and other exercises where we really work that deep flexion at the knee is the positive effect it can have on the joint itself. There is a growing body of evidence in the research literature that working through these deeper ranges of motion can have a beneficial effect on the joint itself in addition to the muscle tissue. There are several mechanisms around why this is the case. One is increased joint stability by strengthening and coordinating the muscles through a full range of motion. This is, of course, huge for anyone coming back from an ACL or other knee injury to protect the knee as they're getting back onto the field. Second is the increased circulation of synovial fluid within the knee, a clear liquid in the joint that lubricates, hydrates, and delivers nutrients to the structures in the knee. Increased circulation of this fluid aids in the hydration of the joint surfaces and delivery of nutrients to structures in the knee that otherwise have a very limited blood flow and nutrient delivery. Remember what we talked about, the differences in blood flow between connective tissue and muscle tissue. Then lastly, and most importantly, is the increased mechanical load placed on the tendons and ligaments from these deeper positions can result in gradual increases in strength, elasticity, and even thickness of both of these kind of structures over time. Anecdotally, I do believe that a big part of the reason we've been able to have the success that we've been able to have, especially with people who have gone through the ringer, have been through multiple different rehab protocols, coming back from multiple different surgeries, is because of our ability to access and train these deep ranges of motion to protect and strengthen the joint from the inside as well as the outside to create a more resilient, robust athlete than the one that got hurt in the first place. So the key with this exercise is prioritizing range of motion first, before trying to push the intensity or add weight, and especially as we start to do both of these things, getting the best range of motion you can has to be the main priority. Otherwise, you will miss out on the majority of the benefits for the joint that we just talked about. It takes that deep bend, that squeezing the joint shut at the very bottom to really get that adaptation that we were talking about. Now, you may not be able to do that right away, and that's totally okay, but we want to be working towards that with each and every session. Many people make some progress in the range of motion department, then want to hurry up and start adding weight. That is a mistake, in my opinion. So similar to the step up, there are a lot of technical cues we're going to get into here, but the main goal of this exercise, the North Star to keep coming back to, is can I get as much range of motion as I can out of this exercise pain-free? So the first time you're getting into this exercise, I want you to elevate the front foot a good amount and use plenty of support in each hand so we can just focus on range of motion and not having to support your body weight. PVC pipes work really well here, but if you're earlier in the rehab process, I like to even use benches or boxes on either sides where you can really support yourself and take your weight off. I will often encourage people to literally act like they were doing a push-up on the box where they take all of their weight off and just focus on bending the knee as far as feels comfortable. From here, we're going to hop the back foot back. And going just an inch or two forward or backwards here can actually make a big difference in how comfortable this movement feels. We'll get into more about that in just a bit, but for now, experiment moving it forward or backwards a tiny bit until you find what feels most comfortable. Now, one of the key differences with the ATG split squat from a normal split squat is I want you to think about moving forward and backwards more than up and down. So leaning on your support, I want you to slowly reach the front knee forward, forward, forward as far as feels comfortable. So we're looking for range of motion here, but as always, don't force it. Just go as far as feels comfortable, pause, breathe out, try and relax, gently push yourself back out, and repeat. Slowly reaching forward until you find your current end range. Pause, relax there, press back out. If your heel on your front foot lifts up here, that's totally fine. Just let it do what it wants to do. Again, it's very important not to force this past where you feel comfortable. A cue I use with many of my athletes is to explore your end range. Just see what you've got and come back. Touch that end range and come back. You'd be amazed by just exploring like this, how much your range of motion can open up from the beginning of a single set to the end, and from the beginning of a single workout to the end. This is how we're able to get even the stiffest, most locked up knee to start to bend again. If you try to force it, I promise you will have a harder time making consistent progress. We are trying to work with the body here, not beat it into submission. So to start, I'm just focused on getting access to that end range. As that range of motion starts to become more and more comfortable, I want to see if we can start to be stricter with our form and still get that really good range of motion. We want to see, can we start to get our torso more vertical in the bottom rather than leaning forward? Can we start to sit our butt on our front heel and really squeeze that front knee shut? Can we start to straighten the back leg and push through our back foot just a little bit more? This is where finding a comfortable distance with your back foot can be really important. Too close and you'll feel jammed up like you want to fall forward past your front knee. Too far and you'll feel like you're ripping your back hip flexor open without being able to reach the front knee all the way forward. The ideal distance allows you to drop right down on top of this front heel with the torso vertical and getting a good stretch in the back hip flexor. Just a couple of centimeters forward or backwards can genuinely make a big difference here. So take your time and don't be afraid to wiggle that foot forward or backwards mid-set until you find that distance that feels best for you. Thinking about actively pushing yourself forward through the back foot is another little cue that can help make this movement feel a little more solid. The perfect position in the bottom is where the bony part of your hip is stacked right on top of the bony part of your ankle, with your shoulders directly over top of that in one straight line. Lastly, as we start to get stronger here and we start to load this exercise, the posture pressing out of the bottom becomes just as important as getting that good range of motion down there in the bottom. We want to press up and out of the bottom, keeping our weight on that front leg in order to correctly load the knee and quad. The two most common mistakes people will make here is letting the hips shoot back and their torso lean forward, or shifting their weight onto their back foot when they first try and press out of the bottom. Both of these will help take load off the front knee and the quad to make the exercise easier, and these are things we want to watch out for. If you catch yourself doing this, lower the weight until we can start to have really strong posture, pressing out of the bottom, where we really start to feel that VMO doing the majority of the work. When it comes to progressing the ATG split squat, I care about access first, then position, then load or pressure. So what does that mean? First, I just want you to be able to start to access this deep flexion, these deeper positions. Use the regressions that we talked about earlier. Plenty of elevation for the front foot and plenty of support for your arms so we can take off as much of your weight as we need to start gently working into some of these deeper positions. Again, I want you to focus on being gentle and exploring what kind of range of motion feels comfortable rather than trying to smash through it and get as deep as you can. 3 to 5 sets, 6 to 10 reps, long pauses in the bottom, lots of support, 2 to 3 times per week. These are some of the set and rep schemes that I will use most commonly with clients at this stage. Now, once you are starting to get access more comfortably, then I want to start to work on position. Can you start to maintain a better posture and more control as you move in and out of these deeper positions? So now we may still use some support at the start of the session, but we're slowly going to start to take that away and decrease the elevation as we go. Here we want to see, can you get really great range of motion at the front knee, really sitting your butt on your front heel while starting to work on some of our other cues with this exercise as well. Keeping the torso vertical, straightening the back leg, getting your hips and shoulders stacked right out of that front foot. And now posture will also apply to the way back up here as well. This is where I'll be much stricter about actually pressing out using that front knee and quad, not letting your hips shoot back or your weight shift onto that back foot. The set and rep schemes won't change too much here. It's more about that intent now and really trying to perfect the movement. 3 to 5 sets, 4 to 8 reps, less elevation and support, really focusing on tempo here, going slow on the way down, pausing in the bottom before pressing back out without letting your weight shift back 1 to 3 times per week. Then lastly, we can think about load or pressure, really trying to squeeze the knee shut in the very bottom and pressing out using that front knee. This is where we'll start to add load, most often with dumbbells, and thinking about using that added weight to pull yourself deeper into the bottom before pressing back out with that front VMO. We really want to focus on keeping our weight on that front leg and not letting yourself shift your weight back or use that back leg to help you out as you're pressing out of the bottom. Set and rep schemes are going to be pretty much the same here as before. 4 to 6 sets, 4 to 8 reps, little to no elevation for that front foot, and slow, controlled tempos 1 to 2 times per week. So now we're going to take a look at the other side of the knee and look at those hamstrings. The Nordic hamstring curl is probably the single most important hamstring exercise I want my athletes to master to transform their athletic ability as they get back into their sport, and even more importantly, reduce their risk of re-injury as much as possible. When it comes to the ACL recovery, quads are king. However, hamstrings are a pretty close second, especially with ACL injuries specifically, compared to other knee ligament or connective tissue injuries. This is because the hamstrings are key to preventing forward translation of the tibia, a key part of the injury mechanism for an ACL. So building super strong, robust hamstrings is a key step in protecting that ACL as you get back into your sport, especially dynamic cutting sports like soccer, football, gymnastics, basketball, etc. Now, there are a lot of hamstring exercises to develop throughout the course of your rehab. Hamstring curls, back extensions, stiff leg deadlifts, and more. But for me, the Nordic is at the very top of the list for a couple of reasons. The major reason comes back to the strength curve idea we talked about with the ATG Split Squat. The Nordic is a very knee-dominant hamstring exercise compared to a deadlift, which is a more hip-dominant hamstring exercise. Not only that, when done correctly, the Nordic will really overload and develop those hamstring tendons all the way down right behind the knee. This is where the exercise is hardest and therefore where you get the greatest adaptation. This means you will get more strength and protection in the hamstrings right behind the knee, right where that ACL comes and inserts into the tibia. This makes it a fantastic exercise for protecting that ACL specifically. In addition, it also has a very high eccentric component, which again is particularly great for building tendon strength. This is definitely something you could also do with other exercises, but the Nordic in particular has that almost built into the exercise. Lastly, it is an awesome exercise for improving sprint speed. I don't want my athletes to just get back on the field. I want them to come back stronger, fitter, faster versions of themselves than they were before they got hurt. To me, this is the only way that we can be confident that we can get back to playing our sport with as little risk as possible of re-injury, and that all the time that we had to spend away from our sport wasn't a waste, but actually an opportunity to come back better. It is this mentality that has helped me get athletes to hit lifetime speed personal bests just 8 months post ACL surgery. Now, there is no one exercise that is going to accomplish this, but it is this mentality and expectation I have as a coach and what I try to instill in all of my athletes that I work with from day one. Mastering the Nordic is just one step in the process, but it is an important one. So let's get into just exactly how we're going to do that. Most people make one of two mistakes when training Nordics. First is they don't train it hard enough. They have it in their program and they're working on the way down, but they're not really fighting for those last couple of inches and don't have a real long-term goal of progression that is going to stay and progress throughout their entire rehab process. Second is that they're in too much of a rush to start working on coming back up. They see these videos on Instagram of people exploding back up or doing floating reps where they come back up without touching, and they want to do that too. So they start doing these swinging, flopping, ugly thing to pull themselves back up. Don't be that guy. The magic of this exercise is on the way down and dominating those last few inches in the very bottom. I've gotten more athletes than just about anybody else out there able to do those floating no-touch reps, even on a deficit like we have here after ACL surgery, many who couldn't do them even before surgery. And we did that by focusing on dominating the way down for months and months before even thinking about trying to work the way back up. Remember what we talked about in the first section about sleds. It is the eccentric portion that builds muscular and tendon strength. That means the way down. I want you to have so much control over that portion of the movement that the way up becomes almost effortless. So that's the soapbox speech. Now let's get into exactly how to start working this. Similar to the sled, the hardest part people often have with this exercise is the setup. The ideal setup is, of course, a Nordic bench. They're designed specifically for this exercise, have plenty of cushion, and feel the best, allowing you to work the hardest. Most gyms, unfortunately, don't have these yet, but there are more and more affordable home options coming on the market that you can purchase yourself. My favorite is the P3 Poor Man's Glute Ham from Sorinex. I did not name this, but that's really what it's called. But it's not crazy expensive, and it's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit more portable, and it's honestly my favorite Nordic bench that I've ever used. A cheaper, smaller option is the Nordic Mini from Freak Athlete. This one is not quite as comfortable, but is smaller and cheaper, making a great at-home option or something you could take with you if you need. Barring those two options, my favorite setup in a commercial gym is actually using a Smith machine. Roll a bench underneath, lower the bar to where you have just enough room where you can slide your feet under and let your feet hang off the back. You're definitely going to want the squat pad or something similar for cushion for your Achilles, and you want to load up the bar with more than your body weight. I actually used this option myself for a while before getting a Nordic bench, and it works pretty well. Bonus points if you can get your friend to stand behind you and give something to anchor your feet against, but you don't have to. If you still can't find that kind of setup, you just want to find something that can hold your feet down and has plenty of cushion for your knees. I've seen people improvise with a variety of gym equipment. A lat pull down actually works pretty well facing away from the machine. A partner can hold you down too, but they need to really hold you down and should ideally weigh more than you. Also, another option that I used out of the park is just like a strap. So something like this that you can kind of anchor yourself to a bench. Again, just something that's not going to move, that's really going to hold you down really firmly. Okay, so hopefully you've got some sort of setup to begin working here. Like we said from the start, all I care about when you're getting started with this exercise is that way down. Can you control down as far as possible before catching yourself, pushing back up, and starting over again? The key with this exercise is the end range. The farther you go, the harder the exercise will get. So that's where I really want you to work the hardest. Fighting for those last couple of centimeters every rep is what makes all the difference in the progress you can make on this exercise. Now, in terms of technique, I do have my athletes do things a little bit differently. I'll have them be slightly rounded at the shoulders and lean forward slightly at the waist. This is probably a slightly exaggerated version of that, but this is also almost his first time getting into this. I do this because you'll see a lot of people, when trying to fight for that last inch, arch and extend their back. And what that does is really recruit the lower back. Now, that will make you feel stronger and have more control, but it takes away from the actual purpose of the exercise, which is develop and strengthen those hamstrings. I want hamstrings, specifically those lower hamstrings down right behind the knee. I want you to feel those grabbing and try to engage as much as possible as you can on the way down. This slightly kyphotic posture with the rounded shoulders, the tucked chin, the slight lean at the hips helps keep the lower back out of it, so we just really pick on those hamstrings. Try to maintain that posture and try to go as low as possible. Push back up with your hands and repeat. Those are really the only technical cues. From there, it's just a matter of being patient and consistent and trying to slowly get stronger, be able to hold yourself lower over time. And it will take time. Trust that this is part of the process and that making tiny incremental improvements week over week will add up to big progress. Now, the one hack I really like with this exercise that will make it feel much more comfortable and a bit smoother is to put one of those foam AirX pads right in front of your knee. This will make the movement feel much more comfortable. Some people will get a little bit of discomfort in that patella. This can fix that. It will also give you a little bit of leverage at the bottom to make the strength curve feel a little bit smoother so it doesn't go from easy to impossible quite so quickly. Unfortunately, there aren't really any substitutes I have found for this. I've tried using a Bosu and other things, and they're okay, but it can really be worth if you have to buy one of those foam little pads. It can make a big, big difference in making this exercise feel more comfortable, feel stronger, and helping with the long-term progression, so that way you can train it harder. So in terms of progressions, there are not a ton of variations or changing rep schemes really to get into. For the most part, it really is just trying to get better at this over time. However, there are a few worth mentioning that we will go over. First and foremost are the regressions. Most people, the first time they try this exercise, feel like they want to fall on their face. That's totally normal and where most people start. If these are feeling so hard that we feel like we can't get much out of the exercise, we can't really train it, we can't develop it the way that we want to, the first place to start is really leaning forward a little bit more at the waist. This will make the leverage more friendly and allow us to start to get a little more out of each rep until eventually you can work towards having more of a straight posture, more of a vertical kind of strict posture, kind of like in the second video. In terms of programming, 3 to 5 sets of 4 to 6 reps is really going to be your sweet spot for just about everybody. For people that are just starting out, I might go twice a week to help them develop this. But once you get past those really early stages, kind of once a week is the most I'm going to use this exercise. Again, because it has such an eccentric component, going to be a lot of soreness if you're really training this hard. So as they progress, maybe we'll go to more of a 4x4 is a common one that I'll use for the kind of mid stages, people that have been training this for a little while. And rarely, if you really need an advanced protocol, sometimes I will go up to like 5 or 6x3 for somebody who's been doing this for a long time and really advanced, who can get a lot more out of each rep. Maybe pair that with like a heavy squat or something like that for a real strength block. But again, that's going to be a little bit more of a rarity and something that's going to be more advanced. The main thing to work towards is mastering the perfect rep. Beautiful control all the way down, just gently touching the bench at the very, very bottom, being able to push back up your hands and do that again and again for multiple reps. That's what we want to see. Can we have that effortless control? Imagine there's an egg or something that you just want to touch, kiss at the bottom without smashing. All right, so one last bonus section for you guys who have stuck it out to the end, and that is going to be all that I know about flossing. Now, if you've seen my content for any length of time, you know that tissue flossing is something I do a ton with all of my athletes. Flossing can reduce pain, improve range of motion, improve muscle activation, reduce swelling, all in about 90 seconds of work with a $30 rubber band you can apply yourself. It consistently remains the single thing that I do with people that gets the most positive feedback, more than anything else that we do with our entire rehab program. I cannot count the number of times of people who have literally described these things as magic, and it still blows my mind that more practitioners don't use them or recommend them, and that more athletes don't have a pair. So if you haven't gotten your pair already, this is your cue to do so. I use the ones made by ATG and the Knees Over Toes guy, and ATP 10 can get you 10% off if you want to grab those. They are my favorite. I like the feel of them the best, but there's a dozen of them on Amazon that all can work pretty well. Now, there's still debate among scientists over exactly what mechanism is at play here, like why they work. But the one thing that I know for sure is that they do work, and that's good enough for me. Now, the bands usually come in a 2-pack, and there are a couple of different ways that you can use them. Some people like to wrap one band above the knee and one band below the knee, leaving the knee itself exposed. You definitely can do it that way if you prefer, but personally, I like to just use one band for the whole knee, as I find the compression to help more with reducing pain and improving range of motion, but try both and see which you prefer. Now, there are 3 main scenarios I like to use the floss bands for, but you will wrap the bands the same way every time. So I'm going to show you how to put them on correctly first, and then we'll get into each of the different protocols. So to wrap it my way, start at the bottom of the knee, overlapping about halfway. You want it pretty snug, but it's not a tourniquet. I tend to pull it a little tighter in the front and a little looser when I wrap it around the back. You want to cover the whole knee roughly from the bottom of the patella tendon to the top of the quad tendon, but it doesn't have to be exact, so don't worry if it doesn't line up perfectly. From there, take that last bit of band and tuck it into itself so it stays in place. Then you're good to go. Now, the first and most common way I like to use the bands is at the start of a session as the very first thing you do when you walk in the door, even before we start dragging the sled. I like to use it first because it's such a great way to get the knee warm and moving more smoothly that it makes everything else we do after feel a little bit better. So once you've got your band on, the most basic level, if you're really early in your rehab process, is just starting to flex and extend the knee, either from a seated or standing position. High reps, we just want to get the knee moving a little bit. This is a good place to start if you're just getting into your rehab and being weight bearing, but I want us to progress that past that pretty quickly. What I want you to start working on is our deeper squat pattern. Just like we did with the ATG Split Squat, we're going to start by holding on to something and just by working on range of motion. Hold on to something really solid to really support yourself and gently just work through as much range of motion as feels comfortable, moving nice and slow, not trying to force the depth, just exploring that end range. You can sit your hips back and really lean on the bar as much as you need to make this more comfortable. Now, you may find that the bands pinch the skin a little bit or pull on your leg hairs, and unfortunately, that's something you kind of just have to deal with. It should get a little better as you go, though, but you should find that the knee itself feels a little more comfortable and more stable than it would have if you tried those squats cold without the bands. As this starts to get more comfortable, either in that current session or just over time as you progress farther into your recovery, we want to see, can we start to get into a more challenging position, keeping the torso more vertical, pushing the knees forward to put more pressure on the knees. You can elevate your heels with a slant board if you want to, but I typically just let the heels float and hold on to something for a little support or balance. With this style, we really want to get a burn in the quads in addition to opening up range of motion. So I like to have my athletes move a little quicker and squeeze out a few more reps here and really chase a burn. The compression from the floss band will act similarly to blood flow restriction training, or BFR, if you've ever done that before. So you might be surprised how quickly your quads start to burn. 10, 20, even 30 reps here is usually plenty to get those quads starting to talk to you. As soon as you're done, sit down, take the bands off, and let all of that blood come rushing back in. This is the part that should feel really good. Give it 10, 20 seconds, wiggle the foot and toes around a little bit, and the knee should feel really nice and warm and ready to get into everything else that you have planned for the session ahead. As a side note for athletes starting to get back into their sport, I love this exact protocol as a way to warm your knee up before a practice or game. Takes 2 minutes and is a great way to get the knee nice and warm and ready to go before jumping into your more traditional dynamic warm-up. Now, the second way that I will use the floss bands is by repeating that exact same protocol, but as a separate session outside of our normal workouts. Like the sled, flossing is something you can do at a high frequency and high intensity with minimal soreness or residual fatigue. If you're looking for extra work you can do to speed up your recovery, an extra round of flossing and sledding outside of your normal workout is a great place to start. It can take as little as 10 minutes and can really move the needle in terms of speed of recovery. For my professional athletes, my athletes on a tight timeline to return to sport, or anyone who just wants extra work to enhance their recovery, this is the first place I send them. Then the final and possibly most useful scenario I love to use the floss bands for is to troubleshoot specific exercises during your rehab session that aren't feeling quite as good as you would like them to, especially those deep squats and split squats. If you try a few reps and your knee's feeling a little stiff, a little tender, a little cranky for whatever reason, in addition to using our regressions we talked about earlier, I'll wrap the knee with the bands the exact same way that we just showed you and have you try the exercise again. Still trying to be nice and gentle, not forcing that end range. The addition of the support from the floss bands so often allows the movement to feel a little bit better to the point where we can now get a positive stimulus from it that helps us get better rather than pushing through things that are uncomfortable and making it worse. Take the bands off at the end of the set and it should start to feel a little bit better. And you can repeat that for multiple sets if you need to. The key there, though, is you do have to take it off in between each one. It's a little annoying having to wrap it up each time, but because we are kind of cutting off blood flow, it's not something you want to leave on for 5-10 minutes at a time. So do a set, take it off, wrap it up, wrap it again, do another set. Particularly for athletes who are struggling with either pain or range of motion, this has been hugely effective in helping them catch up and get back on track. I had a soccer athlete come to me 4 months post ACL and meniscus surgery who could barely get 100 degrees of flexion in his knee, could barely bend this thing. We use the floss bands 4 to 5 times per day while working on his ATG split squat and VMO squat to slowly get his knee to bend again. And at month 8, he played in and won a state championship with his high school and earned a college scholarship. I don't think that would have been possible without using these floss bands as much as we had. Now, they're not going to replace, but rather complement the regressions you use to get into some of these more challenging positions, but when done correctly, can really help enhance your recovery process. All right, that is everything. No, that was a lot of info, so thank you for sticking it out with me to the end. This information is yours now, so I encourage you to go back through this, take notes. The reason this was so information dense is because there are so many little details that I want to be able to share with you guys. I wanted to share about how I think about these exercises, how I use them and how to do them correctly, what to focus on, and how to progress them and put them in your own rehab program. The more I get into this space, the more I find it's not about one big secret. It's about the 100 little details that go into every aspect of your training, how to do each thing correctly, how to regress stuff, how to program things. There are no silver bullets, just 1,000 golden BBs. That's what I wanted to pass on to you today. That's why we just spent half an hour talking about 4 exercises, because the little details make all of the difference. There are a ton of people out there doing knees over toes, doing all of these things. There's not a lot of people doing what we're doing and getting the results that we're getting, and that's why. If there's only one thing I can leave with you today, is to be intentional with everything that you're doing. Pay attention to the details. Think about why you're doing what you're doing and what you're trying to get out of it. Of all the people that I've worked with, young, old, guys, girls, athletic, not athletic, the single trait that has separated people who got decent results from people who got amazing results was their attention to detail, their willingness to do the little things the right way. I can push and encourage and correct you, but at the end of the day, it's on you. I can only show you the path. You are the one that has to walk it. But my only ask of you is, if you found this video helpful, share it with a friend or somebody you know going through this or could benefit from this. There are enough people out there struggling to see the results that they want that I don't want you to be one of them. You never know how much of an impact one little thing can have on a person, and you can be that difference to them by sharing this video. Lastly, if you're interested in joining the 150 plus people that have gotten back to playing their sport and gotten their life back after knee surgery, just click the link for our training application. It's a free way to have a conversation, just talk about where you're at and see how we can help. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, bye.